So in this session, I'm going to address the treatment of inflation in NPV computations. So the theory being that when you're doing your NPV computation, you'll be evaluating cash flows that you expect to rise in the future. Those are forecasts. And certainly don't expect the prices to be exactly the same throughout the project life. The further you go into the project or into the future, the higher the prices may become. So for your computation of NPV to be correct, you need to factor in inflation. And inflation, as we know, is just a phenomenon where prices go up. So then how do we factor in inflation if you're doing an NPV computation? Well, there are two possible approaches that you can use to bring in inflation to your NPV computation. These two approaches are as follows. One, you can inflate the cash flows. So that is one of the possibilities. You can inflate the cash flows. Okay. And if you inflate the cash flows, remember to discount using what we call the money rate of return. So that's the only clue. Once you inflate the cash flows, when it comes to discounting, use the money rate of return. What's the money rate of return? Is simply an inflated discount rate or discount rate which is inclusive over inflation. The second approach that you can use is to ignore inflation. And should you ignore inflation, remember that you need discount using what we call the real rate of return, which is simply a discount rate which is not inflated, which excludes inflation. So then, is there a relationship between real rate and money rate? The answer is yes, there is a mathematical relationship, and that's what you can see there. 1 plus money rate, you can calculate it. You can derive it by taking 1 plus real rate multiplied by 1 plus the inflation rate. So in the examinations, you expect it to move from money rate to real rate and real rate to money rate. And you see that the factor there is inflation. You see that you're adding inflation or you're removing inflation. We're now going to take a question, and the question that we're going to take wants to prove that the two approaches will give us the same answer basically, where we ignore inflation and where we also include inflation. So we have a question here involving a company that is considering to invest $130,000 on this investment or project to generate $40,000 for the next 5 years. But this contribution to be generated has been expressed or quoted at base prices. So we're assuming there's no inflation. However, the contribution will rise the rate of 6% because of inflation. The company's money cost of capital, remember it's money cost of capital, so it means it's an inflated discount rate, is 11%. So our requirement is calculate the NPV using the money and the real cost approach. So in one case, use the money cost of capital, in another case, use the real cost of capital. So what or how will answer look like? If you use the first approach there, you've got your cash flows here. So what we've done is inflated these cash flows at 6%, and these are your inflation factors, 1 plus and 6%. So these are inflated cash flows, and which you can now discount using the money rate at 11%, and that gives us an NPV of 44.54. So this is one of the possible approaches where we inflate the cash flows. However, we can also use an approach where we ignore inflation. But if we're going to ignore inflation, we need to convert the 11%, which is the money rate, into the real rate. So how would we convert the 11% into a real rate? Well, this is what we do. Use the same formula. We put in what has been given and use your expression there, and that gives you your real rate. And if this is correctly simplified, then end up with 4.72%. Now, step number 2, you need to find discount factors at exactly 4.72%, so that the NPV that you get under the inflated approach and we ignore the inflation is exactly the same. So you need now to go back and ask ourselves the question, how do we estimate the discount factor? Now remember, but estimating discount factors at an interest rate R, this is what we do. And in our case, our R is 4.72%, our N is the period that we are looking at. And if we continue, we do that correctly, then you'll go to the discount factor is calculated like that at 4.72. So these are discount factors that you're now going to use at 4.72. So where we have ignored inflation, then we're going to discount at 4.72, and your answer is 44.53, as you can see. Now 44.53 is really the same figure that we have here as 44.54. The 0.02 difference is purely a rounding off error. So which approach will you use in questions? Are you going to inflate the cash flows or ignore inflation? Well, our advice is it depends on one, company policy. If the company policy has been given to you, for instance, the question says this company uses the money cost of capital or nominal cost of capital. What they're telling you is that this company basically inflates all the cash flows. Alternatively, where you notice that different cash flows are inflating at different rates of inflation, the correct approach is to inflate the cash flows first and then discount using the money rate of return. So in the next session now, we're going to look at taxation. How do we bring in taxation in our NPV analysis? And also want to look at working capital. How do we treat working capital in our NPV analysis? So that is what we're going to look at in our next session coming soon.